one of the unseen, I don't know, like unseen pressures that I had, like recently in my life, I suppose in the last 10 years, that I didn't like know was such a big deal, was the pressure to make sure you named your kids right. Like, you're thinking about this and it's like, you have some time, hopefully like 7, 8, 9 months to name your kids. And you start thinking through names and you start getting a list and you talk with your significant other about this and you're trying to compile like names that would be cool, names that would have meaning, names that would be amazing. So you think of all these things, you look at lists, you look at all sorts of lists and you're trying to find names that have a great meaning or have a family meaning and then you start thinking about these names, you come to a name and then the next step after you get these compiling lists of names is you go through the names again and you start thinking, how can they be made fun of for this name? At least that's what we did. Do I know any kids in school and how can they make this name something that's not okay? How can they pick on this name? How can they make it something that's different? How can they make it something that would be, I don't know, that they would never ever lose for the rest of their life? I mean, there's a reason why names like Methuselah do not exist anymore, or just no one's named that here, right? No, I'm just kidding. But, that would have been so embarrassing. That would have been terrible. That would have been like the worst beginning to a sermon ever. That's an awful name. Well, that's my name. Oh, sorry. Welcome to Rock Haven Church. But and so I remember a story when I was younger. I was in, I think, 4th grade at the time. And I was in a class, and there was another kid who was one of my best friends. His name was Joel also. So there's Joel and Joel. And one of the first weeks of class, my teacher's like, okay, this isn't going to work. One of you needs to come up with a different name because I'm not going to say I'm not going to say this and have confusion all year round. And I was like 4th grade. I was like, okay, so I can like pick whatever I want. I want to be like Danger, things like that, right? Something cool. And I come home and I was told by my parents, no, your name is Joel. We picked that name for you. And I went back and I don't know how it happened, but that's just how it went. Like, no, you don't need to change your name. We picked your name. We declared your name. And we're kind of going to get into this story in Acts today where God is going to declare something. And sometimes we forget that. Our God is a God who declares things, who says this is what it is, and it's not, and hopefully that's the way it goes. It's our God says this is what it is, and that is how it's going to be. When He declares something, it is true. By the word of His mouth, by who God is, because we say that God is wholly other. He is existence and being Himself. Without Him, we don't breathe, we don't have life, we don't exist. And so when God says something, it's not just a strong implication, it's no, reality changes to fit what God says it is. And so God's going to declare some things in this chunk of scripture here, and they're going to be true. And it is the longest narrative in the book of Acts. So we're not going to get through all of it today, but we're going to get through a part of it today where God is going to say, this is what I say it is, and that's what it's going to be. And it's a really important verse for us as believers. It's one of the most important stories for us and America as a story, as Christians. So let's jump into that. Why don't we go in Acts chapter 10, we're going to start in verse 1. So at Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort. He was a devout man who feared God with all of his household, gave alms generously to the people, and prayed continually to God. So we're introduced to a man named Cornelius. Also a name I have not seen a lot of return of either. But we like Cornelius. This is a good man. Obviously, the text right away is telling us this guy, he's a good person. He prays continually and he gives alms, which is that fancy word. He's saying he's giving money to those who are in need. He's doing this constantly. And he's a Roman centurion. And now we're sitting here, wait a second. If he's Roman, how can he be good? Because we're kind of trained that way. If he's Roman, he can't be good because the Romans are kind of enslaving and ruling the Jewish people, right? Yeah. But he's still a good person. He's still a good Roman centurion. So what that means is he was the leader of 100 men. That's what a centurion means, a century, to get that prefix in there. And he was a part of a cohort which was made up of 6 centuries. So he's one of 6 leaders. And that cohort was nicknamed the Italian cohort. So we don't know anything more about it other than the fact that he was a part of this branch of the Roman military, and he was well known in a town called Caesarea. But you're thinking, and I know this is what you're all thinking, but Joel, weren't we talking about the story in Joppa? Yes, we were. We're still talking about Peter, and all those Peter and the disciples are in the town of Joppa, but this is going on in Caesarea. That is 31 miles away. 31 miles away from where the disciples are. And he's this God-fearing man. Now, don't jump to conclusions here, because this is something, we read this verse a lot, this phrase, a God-fearing man in Acts. And sometimes we're like, oh, that means that's good, right? But it doesn't mean what we think it means. It is good, but it doesn't mean that he is a believer. It doesn't mean that he is a Christian. It doesn't even mean that he is a Jew. Because even though he may follow the customs of Judaism, which we're going to see, he follows all the rules and some of the laws of being a Jew, he has not become converted. He is not converted. He is not a Christian. He just says, yep, there's a God out there, and I respect him for who he is, and I'm going to try to be a good person. It's kind of important where this story is going to go, because oftentimes I feel like we want to jump, oh, he fears God, he knows who God is, well, then he must be a Christian. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. In the world, we know lots of people who say God is real and God is powerful, but don't actually follow Jesus. Or God is who he says he is. That's fantastic, and I'll be a good person, but that doesn't make them a Christian. What makes a person a Christian? It's one of the things that we're going to answer in this text, because Cornelius is a good person, but a good person does not make you saved. Okay, let's keep going in verse 3. We're going to pick up here. It says, about the 9th hour of the day, which is 3 p.m., he clearly saw in a vision an angel of God come in and say to him, Cornelius. So it's just, I don't know, I'm having fun at this. I'm just imagining this, Cornelius. I'm trying to think how it would sound in my voice. It's not God, it's an angel. And verse 4, and he stared at him in terror. This is a very common response, by the way. Don't think just because he's not a believer, it's like, oh, he doesn't know what to do with an angel. No, pretty much every instance in the Bible where people come in contact with an angel or some form of the presence of God, people lie on the ground and say, please don't kill me. I am in terror. I am overwhelmed by the presence of who you are and your power and your holiness. Not because God is vindictive and he's evil, but it's just to be in the presence of something so monumentally powerful is overwhelming to us as people. We like this in the world. We like, what's one of the popular destinations for vacation? The Grand Canyon. Why? It's literally a hole in the ground. Why? Because it's big. We like to feel small in comparison to what big is. But at the same time, there's this sense of going over to the edge and looking down. It's like, man, if I fell in there, I'm dead. But God is bigger. Bigger fear, bigger terror, bigger power. So just kind of phrase our thoughts this way too. And he stared at him in terror, and he says, what is it, Lord? And he said to him, your prayers and alms have ascended as a memorial before God. As before God. So his prayers, his consistency, his alms, his giving, his kindness, his goodness have ascended as an offering. Okay? Now, don't take this too far. This is a thing we may want to jump to sometimes as Christians, where we'd be like, okay, well, if I give enough money and I pray enough and I go to church enough, I will be saved. That's not what this is saying. That is not what the angel said. He says they have been received as a memorial. The same type of thing you can read in Jeremiah, in Ezekiel, and all sorts of different chunks of Scripture where it says, your offering has been received. Your offering is a pleasant fragrance to God, is what the Old Testament will actually talk about in there. It's this idea of sacrifice. That's the word that we should use. But think of Old Testament sacrifice before we think of sacrifice. When we think of sacrifice, we think of, well, I'll go without looking at my social media for a couple days. Okay, that's not the kind of sacrifice we're talking about. It's a sacrifice of I'm giving up something of myself to God for the sake of God. It's the same type of thing when we do our tithes and offerings as well. We give it not because we're supposed to do. We give it because I want to give to God something of mine for His glory and His benefit that will be used in His kingdom. And he recognizes that God is going to take this, that this is a pleasant, sweet aroma to God. And that's what the angel comes down and says, it has been seen. They have been noticed by God. Even though this man, Cornelius, is not a believer. His acts are not saving him, but his acts are good things. His acts are doing good things. And so what does the angel say? He says, and now I want you to send men to Joppa and bring one Simon who is called Peter. He is lodging with Simon, a tanner, two Simons, just so we don't get confused, who is in a house by the sea. Okay? The angel doesn't come down and says, oh, Cornelius, you have given so much and you have prayed so consistently that we're going to just have an exception for you and bring you into the kingdom of God because you're such a good person. That will never happen because you can never be good enough. You can't. You can never be good enough. This is what the angel says. Your prayers and your alms have been seen as this present, fragrant aroma to God. And because of this, God is going to use your prayers and use you to accomplish what He is already planning to do. He doesn't say, thus you are saved. He says, now go and get Peter and watch what I'm going to do. Watch how I'm going to use it. Watch how I'm going to use you. Watch what God is in the act of doing. This has nothing to do with Cornelius' actions. This is all to do with God honoring and saying, look what I'm going to do through you. Through him. Okay. So Simon, who is Peter, is the Peter we think of when we think of the disciples, the apostles. We've been learning about him all the time. I don't know why they, for this chunk, go back to Simon Peter. That is his name, but often we just call him Peter. And then there is Simon the tanner, who is also who Peter was staying with. Okay, so just so we don't get these confused, this is how we know it's a real story, because if it was a made-up story, I would pick this two different names, not Simon and Simon, right? Simon the tanner, he's staying with him. Okay, so that happens all in the town of Caesarea. And now we're going to go back to verse 9. Oh, sorry, we have to verse 7. Verse 7, and when the angel who spoke to him had departed, the centurion Cornelius called two of his servants and a devout soldier from him, and those who attended him, and having told him everything, he sent them to Joppa immediately. So we know Cornelius, obedient man, sends people to go get Peter. Okay, now verse 9, we're kind of shifting focus. We're kind of going to the other side of this story in verse 9. It says, the next day, as they, meaning the soldier and his two servants from Cornelius, were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the housetop about the 6th hour, which we know is 3 o'clock, to pray. It was the traditional time during this era where people would go to pray. It was one of the times that you would go up and you would face Jerusalem and pray. As a Jew, as a Christian, you would pray. This is a time set aside for being consistent, for being regular on your praying time. And so Peter is up there. And I think this is just, okay, you understand, I thoroughly enjoy this story just because I think it's amazing. I relate to Peter so much because Peter, I think, just sometimes is just stumbles into things by accident and he does something. And all of a sudden God's like, oh, you're like, you want to walk on water? We can do that. And Peter's like, wait a second, I wasn't serious. But no. And Peter's up praying. And I just relate to him this way. And it says, and he became hungry. And first off, it means one thing. One, I like Peter. Because this is me. If I'm bored, I'm hungry, right? This is what happens. Okay. Secondly, Peter's up on the rooftop. And he's been there for at least a significant period of time. This isn't like I get up there and it's like 3 o'clock, my alarm goes off and it's like, okay, dear Jesus, give me a good day. Pray for my people around me. Amen. No, Peter's been up here for a while. He's been on the rooftop. This isn't just this time of just prayer, but it's time of worship, of being with God. John and I have talked a lot about this idea of abiding with Jesus. This is what Peter is doing. He's set aside this time to go up there and to just take time to be with God, to pray, to seek, to read what the scriptures have for him. And he became hungry and wanted something to eat. Then it says, but while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance. So Peter says to someone in the house, hey, will you prepare me some food? So he goes back up to pray. And people are still preparing. So there's times he goes up and he continues to pray. And it says he fell into a trance. Now some of your versions will probably say a vision. That's probably a better word. Because when we get the idea of trance, we think of this weird sense of we're not in control of our bodies. That's not what this is about. This is just like Cornelius. They're praying and God gives them a vision. He speaks to these men in visions. He speaks to them and tells them what is going on. Okay? In verse 11, and he saw the heavens opened and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its four corners upon the earth. So if you and just imagine to look up and just to see the heavens, the skies open up, and this gigantic, somehow I just imagine this big, huge white canvas sheet, and it's got some kind of like a string or some kind of something that's lowering it down by the four corners of it, and it's coming down to earth. And Peter is looking at this going, what on earth is going on? And in it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, and if you notice, if you have a red letter Bible, this is in red. It says, rise, Peter, kill and eat. Kill and eat. But there's certain kinds of animals here. Because Peter's going to push back, and he says, no, by no means, Lord. In fact, in the Greek, it's a double negative saying, no, you don't understand. Like when they do that, that means, I will not do this. The double negative means, this isn't like like when someone offers you the second piece of cake at Thanksgiving, you're like, no, thank you, because we're being Minnesota nice, but we really want it. No, Peter really isn't going to do this. There is no way that Peter's like, no, this is how I was raised. Ever since I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. Because Peter is first and foremost a Jew. Okay, so that means what he has abided his entire life by are the cleanliness laws of the Old Testament. He has not eaten pigs. He has not eaten bacon. He has not eaten certain birds or reptiles or things. They are considered unclean to a Jewish audience. They cannot eat them because the Old Testament specifically says you cannot eat these things because they will make you unclean. Now, we've used that word unclean and clean a lot, and really we kind of need to visit what that means because that's really going to kind of unpack where we're going with this. To be unclean in the Old Testament means you had to go through a period of time and also a process of purification or sanctification to make yourself clean again. Now, this wasn't necessarily just for sin. Maybe you accidentally didn't realize that you ate some bacon. And there is a whole section for accidental times of becoming unclean. Other instances of making you unclean would be working with dead animals or touching dead animals, which is why the text is so emphatic that Peter is staying with a tanner. What does a tanner do? He tans dead animal hides. The tanner is constantly in a state of uncleanness. And Peter is residing around dead animals. Okay, so here we have some of these rules, these laws. You can't eat these, you can't do this. But in order to become clean, you had to go through this process. You had to either go outside or give a sacrifice or do a washing. It's something that was a daily part of being a Jewish life, of following God and His rules and His laws. And I'm so thankful that we don't have to do that because it sounds like a lot. But we have to remember that there's unclean, we get that, in order to be clean, but clean is back to zero. Does that make sense? To be unclean is to be in debt. To be clean is to be zero. But there's a whole nother level in the Old Testament to talk about where it is to be holy. That's the positive. That's the natural. That is where we must be. So it's not okay just to be clean. We need to be holy as well. And this is one of the reasons why people say, well, what if I'm a good enough person? Can I go to heaven? No, you can't. You can't be at zero and have enough standing with God to go to heaven because you're at zero. We have to have righteousness. We have to have holiness. And the only way we get this is through Jesus. That's it. There's no other way. And so we have to talk about that, because now Peter is saying, I'm not going to eat these animals. I can't do this, God. Like, you can't. I'm going to be unclean. I don't want to do that. I'm not supposed to do that. I want to be clean. And the voice came to him again, a second time. What God has made clean, do not call unclean, or do not call defiled, or do not call common. God is declaring something. He is stating something. This is what is now true. Because what has happened since then? Something significant has happened since the Old Testament laws. Something has changed. Something has shifted that has changed the entire reality of spiritual living for all of us. The crucifixion. The sacrifice has been made. The cross has been accomplished. It has been defeated. And Christ, who is perfect, without sin, has gone and died a death that was meant for people who are defiled and unclean and unable to get clean. And Jesus says, I will take it for you. And in your place, I will give you my holiness, my righteousness. That's what salvation is. It's saying, I lose my uncleanness and I get Jesus' righteousness. I'm not just back to zero, I'm well beyond that. I'm well beyond that. So this is a significant thing for us as Christians, because God has said to us who are Christians, you guys ever wrestle with doubt about your salvation? You guys ever wrestle, well, maybe what I said when I prayed and maybe what I don't really believe is true, maybe what I'm really not as sure. It's like, well, that one time when I did pray and I did get baptized and I've lived my life for many months and many years this way, but I'm like, man, I'd like this 1% chance. It's like, well, maybe I didn't really mean it. What God has said is clean, do not call unclean. That includes ourselves about what God has done in ourselves. If God has done a work in you and has saved you, do not live in doubt, but live in the assurance that God has declared that you are righteous and live that way. But also, we need to take this seriously, because now this is shifting, because up until then, the people, the Jews, Peter and the disciples weren't really quite sure what to do with the non-Jewish people. The people who aren't Jews. I'm not Jewish. How am I a Christian? Because, well, I didn't, Jesus is a Christian. Jesus is a Jew. How am I supposed to do that? And here's what they're getting at. And here's another reason I relate to Peter, verse 16. And this happened 3 times. And Peter's like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you really sure? By the way, he's just having this frank conversation with God. And it happened again and again. What God has called clean, do not call common. Now, while Peter was inwardly perplexed, he was confused at what the vision that he had seen might mean. Behold, the men who were sent from Cornelius, having made this for Simon's house, stood at the gates and called out to whether Simon, who was called Peter, was here. And while Peter was thinking on the vision, pondering on the vision, the Spirit said to him, behold, there are 3 men looking for you. Now, as Peter, I'm sitting here kind of all of a sudden like, wait a second, why are they looking for me? Did Stephen not just die how many months ago? And, there's a little bit of what's going on here? And it says, if you read in the Greek, it actually says this word that says, you might disagree with what I'm going to say, but you're going to do it anyways. That's what it means. And it says, rise and go down and accompany them without hesitation. I mean, this is God's version of being like, did I stutter? You need to go down and do this right now. You need to listen and obey. And Peter went down to the men. I'm the one you're looking for. Peter's being bold. He just saw some crazy vision, and this is going to answer. What's the reason for your coming? And they said, Cornelius, a centurion, who's upright, God-fearing, who is well spoken of the whole Jewish nation, and not a convert, was directed by an angel to send for you to come to his house. That is not a message in any day that you would expect to hear. So he invited them to be his guests, and then we're going to have to end there because we'll pick it up next week, but then he goes back with them. What is happening here? Cornelius is about to experience one of the most life-changing things for all of Christianity, because now it's not, you have to be a Jew to be a Christian. You have to be a Jew to be this. You have to be converted. You have to go through all the rituals and all the purifications and all the circumcision, all these things to get in the hoops. Then you can be a Christ follower. No, God is saying, this has been my plan all along. This is not an accident. This is not plan B. This is not the second option saying, well, the Jews are being stubborn. I guess we'll bring in the Gentiles and all the other nations too. All along, this has been God's plan. And he's bringing Peter in, and he's going to use Cornelius. He's going to use Cornelius to say, just because you are not Jewish does not make you outside the bounds of what Jesus has called his. God has created all people in his image. All people bear his mark in some way, shape, or form, but not all people are saved. And this is why they say, do not call unclean what God has called clean. God has declared everyone is up to zero. We've all got this point, but we're not holy. That's where we need the supernatural righteousness. That's where we need God to intervene. That's where we need God to bring me from where I was to who I need to be. Because I can't get to what I need to be by anything that I do. There is no amount of work or goodness or right things that I can do in 1,000 lifetimes that will make me holy. The only way to get there is by what God says when I say, I declare you're holy. And the way to be declared holy is to say, I follow Jesus. I follow Jesus. He's the one who did the exchange. They call it the Great Exchange. That's the theological term where they say, I've taken your uncleanness and I've given you Jesus' holiness. So when God looks at us and we stand before the throne, we get to stand with a declaration before another declaration of a God who is our great judge and declare one day we stand and I think he's going to play before God in my entire life. And I'm going to see all the things in my life that I've done that I'm like, man, I'm not proud of that. Well, maybe that's a little bit to be proud of. Nope, there's more stuff. And I'm going to stand before him and he's going to be like, why should I let you in? I'm going to be able to shake my hand and just be like, because I know Jesus. And then the gavel is going to come down and he's going to say, and I declare that you are righteous because of Jesus. And he takes it a step further and he gets down from the judge's station and he comes up to you and he wraps you up and he says, and you are now in my family as my son and as my daughter. That's what Christianity is, to say you were not clean and you were not worthy, and Jesus says, I know. But Jesus says, I will make you mine, and I will take your sin, and I will give you my righteousness, and I will declare that you are right because of things that Jesus has done, and you are adopted into my family and gain the greatest inheritance that we can ever ask for, an eternity of salvation in paradise with him. This is what's happening. This is what is going on as the vision, as Peter is seeing that this is not expanded just to the Jewish nation, but it is being expanded to the entire world. And think of the implications that comes with as Christians to now go out and to share to the whole world that you don't have to live in the state you're in. You don't have to live in fear. You don't have to live with the idea that hell is coming. You can live with the idea that Jesus has paid for your sins. It has already been taken care of, but you need to take the steps to follow. Because that's the question we're really going to get into is, so what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? Does it mean you go to church? Does it mean you do these things? Yes, that's what you do, but that does not make you a Christian. What does making you a Christian look like is that you follow Jesus. That you say, I am all in with him. He is my Lord. I want to do the things that he tells me to do. That I want the Bible uses the word, we are no longer slaves to sin, meaning we had no choice, but we choose not just to be free, we choose to be a slave to Jesus. And I don't want any other option. I want to do what he tells me to do. I want to follow what he wants to do. It's a huge shift. I was once dead, but now I'm alive. I was once lost, but now I'm found. What it means to be a follower of Jesus is that I am all in on pursuing what he does. That I pray, that I follow. It's not just that I believe that there is a God, but I believe and I have all my faith in Jesus that he's the one who does all the work. So, Miles, would you bring your team up? So for next, we'll pick up again next week, but we're not going to read in the sermon 24 through 33, because it kind of retells the same thing that we're going to get into, and because it's such a long chunk. So Go home and read 24 to 33 before next week. Maybe you think it's odd. It's like, well, why did God use a vision of food to talk about the cleanness of people? And we're very thankful because we can eat bacon because of this vision. We laugh, but that's actually true, and that's one of the reasons why. But also, food is what binds us in so many ways. Every month we celebrate communion together, which is the partaking of food because of something God has done. It's a great joy that we have as Christians. It's a commandment we have to feast together. And here we have Peter doing that because of what God is already working in us. So, have a great Sunday. Please talk to me with questions. Have a great Sunday.